It was 2014. I remember the year clearly because the world felt heavy. My older cousin, who was more like a big brother to me, had died in a high-speed motorcycle accident on a rainy Tuesday night. There was no goodbye, no hospital bedside vigil, just a phone call that changed everything. He was 24, a guy who lived for the outdoors. He always had this thick, unkempt beard that he refused to trim, and wore these heavy flannel shirts over band tees, which was the style back then. He had this messy, shoulder-length hair that he'd usually hide under a beanie. 2 weeks after the funeral, my younger sister, who was only 7 at the time, was the only one in the house who didn't seem crushed by the grief. She was a fearless kid, the type who would pick up spiders with her bare hands. One night, around 3 a.m., I woke up to get a glass of water. As I passed my sister's room, I saw her door cracked open. She was sitting up in bed, looking toward the hallway. I asked her what she was doing. She just shrugged and said she was just watching that man. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. When I asked her which man she meant, she said he had been sitting on the stairs for a while, just looking at the wall and appearing tired. I looked out into the hallway. The stairs were shrouded in shadows, the modern LED nightlight casting a weak, blue glow against the wood. I didn't see anyone. My sister wasn't scared at all. She just laid back down, pulled her covers up, and fell asleep within minutes. The next morning, my dad was in the kitchen fixing coffee. My sister walked in and asked who the guy with the big beard on the stairs had been the night before. My dad stopped mid-pour. His face went pale. He thought someone had broken in. He started questioning her, asking if the man had a weapon, if he said anything, or what he was wearing. My sister simply described a man with long, messy hair and a thick beard, wearing a familiar-looking flannel shirt, noting that he looked just like the picture in the hallway. My dad didn't say another word. He knew exactly who she was describing. A few months passed, and the vibe in the house never really settled. Things started happening. We'd be sitting in the dining room, a modern, open-concept space, and things would just move. One evening, we had a small gathering. A close friend of my mother was over. She was the type of person who claimed to feel things, energies, spirits, whatever you want to call it. We were all sitting around the table eating dessert when the serving spoon in the center of the bowl suddenly flipped. It didn't just slide. It flipped over as if someone had pushed the handle down hard. My mom just sighed and reset it, telling her friend not to mind it because they had a bit of a ghost problem. The friend didn't laugh. She was staring intently at the corner of the room near the staircase. Her eyes were wide, tracking something we couldn't see. With a trembling voice, she told us that he was standing right there at the top of the landing, just watching the front door, as if he were waiting for someone to come home. I looked up. For a split second I saw a flicker, a distortion in the air, like heat rising off a highway. It was the shape of a tall man with broad shoulders. Then, the friend looked at my grandmother, who was sitting at the end of the table, and whispered that there was an older woman behind her wearing a high-collared lace dress who looked exactly like the photograph. She pointed to the wall behind my grandmother. There was an old framed black and white photo of my great-grandmother from the early 1900s. In the photo, she was unsmiling, her hair pinned back tightly, wearing a very distinct, stiff lace collar. The room went ice cold. The spoon in the bowl flipped again, clattering against the glass so hard it nearly cracked. My sister, still unfazed, just reached out and grabbed a cookie, remarking in a voice that sounded far too old for a 7-year-old that they were just staying with us because they didn't have anywhere else to go. To this day, I don't like walking past those stairs at night. Sometimes when the house is quiet, I can still hear the faint sound of heavy boots stepping on the wooden landing, even though I know no one is there. It was the late autumn of 2012, a time defined by the constant hum of digital devices and the crisp, damp air of our suburban neighborhood. My older sister, who was in her early 20s back then, worked as a traveling caregiver for the elderly to make some extra cash on the weekends. Since our parents were often busy with their own renovation business, I would frequently get dragged along to her appointments. One of her regulars was a very thin woman in her late 80s who lived in a house that felt like a time capsule. I vividly remember her silver hair always pinned back in a sharp, unforgiving bun, and the way her thick, tortoise-shell glasses magnified her watery blue eyes. She rarely spoke to me, but she always wore these heavy knitted floral cardigans that seemed to swallow her small, fragile frame. The house itself was a sprawling, single-story ranch built decades ago. It always smelled of dried lavender and stale tea, a scent that clung to my clothes long after we left her driveway. Within a year of our visits, the news reached us that the woman had passed away peacefully in her sleep, right in her master bedroom. The property sat vacant for several months, its windows staring out like empty eyes, until a for sale sign finally disappeared from the front lawn. A young family with a toddler eventually moved in, and the neighborhood seemed to return to its usual quiet rhythm for a while. My sister eventually stopped her caregiving work to join our father's business full-time, but we never truly forgot that strange, silent house. About 6 months later, my sister attended a local community barbecue held at a park just a few blocks away from our home. While she was hovering near the grill, she struck up a conversation with a woman in her mid-30s who seemed exhausted and visibly shaken. This woman mentioned she had recently relocated to the area and was living in the old ranch house. As they talked, the new neighbor began to confess that her dream home had quickly turned into a living nightmare. She described how heavy kitchen chairs would be found stacked on the table in the middle of the night without any logical explanation. The woman admitted she felt like she was being watched from every dark corner of the hallway whenever she was alone. The neighbor continued her story, her voice trembling as she recounted how their electronics would malfunction at the exact same time every single night. Radios would blast static at full volume in the basement, and the television would flicker through channels until it landed on white noise. Her most terrifying claim involved her 4-year-old son, who had started refusing to sleep in his own bedroom because of the visitor. She explained how the boy would wake up screaming that a mean grandmother was standing perfectly still at the foot of his bed. According to the child, the figure didn't say anything but just stared at him with huge, bulging eyes behind thick glasses. My sister felt a cold chill run down her spine as the realization of who the boy was seeing hit her. My sister decided to ask for more specific details about what the boy claimed to see during those late-night visits. The neighbor described a very frail, elderly woman wearing a distinctive, brightly colored floral cardigan and sporting a tight silver bun. She even mentioned the tortoiseshell glasses, noting how the boy was specifically afraid of how large and watery the ghost's eyes appeared. My sister went pale and quietly revealed that she used to care for the previous owner who had died in that very room. She confirmed that the description was a perfect match for the woman who had spent her final years inside those walls. The neighbor nearly dropped her drink, her face turning a ghostly shade of white as the truth of the situation settled in. The terror became so unbearable for the new family that they eventually reached out to a local priest to perform a formal house blessing. They walked through every room with incense and holy water, reciting prayers to reclaim the space from whatever energy had remained behind. My sister heard later that the atmosphere in the house shifted instantly, turning from heavy and oppressive to light and calm. The toddler stopped seeing the figure at the end of his bed, and the furniture finally stayed exactly where it was placed. It has been over a decade since those events took place, but I still avoid driving past that area whenever the sun goes down.